Sarah, that's fab. So I was quite worried I was going to do a Robert Peston and keep myself muted. I don't know if you saw that tonight, that he was asking his questions of the UK news briefing, and how many times have we all done that in the last 4 weeks? Quite a lot. So brilliant to see so many of you in the meeting tonight. Our programme of webinars has been really fantastic. We've had some super interesting speakers, and tonight's not going to be any exception, I know, but I just want to give you a bit of a rundown on what we have been doing for the last 4 and a bit weeks. Obviously, the Chamber team, like many of you, are fully working from home remotely. We have furloughed some people, and that definitely was a decision that we didn't take lightly, and we only just took it this week. But I mean, every business is looking at what it does, and we've been no exception. We've been putting on a real huge number of webinars, and Sarah's doing a brilliant job of doing a regular programme of 4 webinars in a week. So Tuesday during the day we do our members networking session, coffee and a virtual cake. And we did actually have somebody eating cake today, which I thought was a good, very, very good effort. Not sure it was homemade, but then neither would mine have been. Tuesday evenings are our guide to. So we've done a guide to cash flow. This is obviously a guide to sales. We did a guide to communication. So lots of really interesting practical tips. On a Wednesday, our webinar is aimed at supporting people. So we've covered topics like motivation, remote working, mental health and well-being. And then on a Thursday, our webinar is aimed at supporting your business. So again, we've looked at the business support schemes that are available, all sorts of different ones. And this week, for Chamber members only, British Chambers of Commerce are interviewing Liz Truss, who is the UK's International Trade Minister. She's going to be talking about supply chain and international trade and how we can all learn from the markets that have moved into recovery and how they've got through that. So, lots of that going on. And as you might imagine, a huge amount of talking to governments and giving them lots of feedback from what we're hearing from businesses, but also talking to them about what business support measures they're looking to bring in and what we feel would work best, where the gaps are, and there are still gaps, but there's been announcements today from Scottish Government about filling some of those gaps and some really welcome moves to support leisure and hospitality businesses that are too large for some of the rates grants that you can get. Also the self-employed hardship fund, and that's going to be an interesting one, I think, because it's important. The self-employed people that have fallen through cracks will have to be able to show that they haven't had extra, they've not got support in some other way, but also that there is hardship. So we're watching that one pretty carefully to make sure that doesn't just discount everybody, and we're back in sort of where we were at the beginning. And we have our own COVID hub, which we're keeping very up to date. We launched a Partners for Business programme recently, and that's doing a number of things. It's we're taking leadership pieces and articles for our website, which is called A View from the Bridge. So, there's a number of things up there already that you can read about, but our Platinum partners and Enterprise partners will also feature on our webinars, and they've launched a mentoring programme for businesses. So if you're a business that at the moment is looking for some short, sharp support from one of the larger organisations in the region, whether it's HR, whether it's about commercial information, whether it's about coping with demand that you might be, actually your business might be flying at the moment, or you might really be struggling, or you might be somewhere in between, then there'll be somewhere in one of those partners that you can actually get the right support and guidance from. And then, as I say, we have been listening a lot to feedback, and we are still hearing of issues, and particularly with the business loans that's not getting to people as quickly as it might need to be. The local authorities are doing a brilliant job of getting the grant money out, but again, there are still some sticky points in that where it would be nice to have that faster. But also this week the job retention scheme opened, and a phenomenal number of applications have already been received. And they have made a promise to turn that claim around in 6 working days. So Hopefully that means that people will have money in their accounts when doing the April payrolls, which is what we've been asking for. So lots going on. I think you work harder from home than you might do when you're sitting at your desk. It's just a very different environment, isn't it? But hopefully everybody's looking after themselves. And today's a really good example of people that want to do something proactive, listen to somebody that we know is going to really give us some incredible insights. I've been lucky enough to be in Sandy's training a number of times, and it's always really interesting. And then there'll be time at the end for some questions. So Sandy, I'm going to hand over to you. When I can hear you, I will get out of the way, and then it's over to you.
You hear me, Alison?
Sure can.
Good. I thought Sarah was maybe coming in, but straight on to me, but that's fine. And thanks very much for the plug. I appreciate it. Can you still hear me? Hi, Alison.
Sorry, I muted myself, but I'm nodding.
Right,
yes,
okay,
I can definitely still hear you.
Right, okay, I'll carry on. Thanks very much for that, Alison. I appreciate that. I was just saying to Sarah earlier, I read what I said I was going to cover and went, oh my God, I'm a bit surprised at what I've said. But I then thought about it and I really mean it. The world can change with one conversation at a time. And I think that's what sales is all about. I think back 3 years ago when I got a message from Angie Foreman, Angie DeVos as she is now, saying she had this crazy idea. And we sat in the Apex Hotel in Dundee and she described the idea of how we could help women gain confidence and set up businesses. And lo and behold, the Women's Business Station is still going strong despite the challenges today. And I think that's an example of how conversations can change things. Most of my work is what I call working in the vital 30%. Most customer journeys is 70% digital. They search for you online, they search your social media, they have a look at testimonials. And it's only when they get to that 30% where they need to talk to somebody, a customer-facing team member, whether it be on the phone, emails, or face-to-face. This is the area that I love and the area I work in. If maybe I can just talk a little bit at the mega level. I've been very interested in what constitutes an entrepreneurial ecosystem. My friend Finlay Kerr from Fresh Marketing and I discussed this 4 years ago and thought, could Tayside be an entrepreneurial ecosystem? And really for Dundee and Tayside to be that, there has to be access to human, financial and professional resources. And I think there also has to be academic institutions that understand the need for entrepreneurialism. And whereas I don't think we're there yet, I do think that we're on our way. I've been involved with the Centre for Entrepreneurship at Dundee University, and I've seen huge changes there. So I think on a big level, we are seeing changes. And although there's a challenge and a dip just now, I think we will come back stronger. So what I want to talk about is basically the two elements, first of all, on what excellent salespeople need. And they're quite different. There was research done many years ago. And by the way, I've been selling for 40 years, and I guess I've been very lucky in that there was almost no research over the years, and all the learning came from doing and speaking to other salespeople. What's really pleasing is we're starting to see academia getting interested in sales. And there's a lot more information out there. Anyway, the two things that a salesperson, an excellent salesperson, a high-performing salesperson needs is ego drive. And ego drive is basically the fact that the salesperson is totally committed to achieving target, to achieving their objectives. And I think that's what we would expect of salespeople. When we talk about salespeople, and people quite often phone me and say, you know, really, I'm not sure if I want to talk to you because surely salespeople are manipulative, they're into the hard sell. And I always say nothing could be further from the truth, but that's people's views because they see ego-driven salespeople. But the really excellent salespeople have another element to that balances that, and that is empathy. They are somehow, when they're dealing with customers, being totally customer. They only think about how they can help the customer. I've been studying this for a long time, and I came across a word that Desmond Tutu was talking about that really resonated. And I think that the challenges we are having at the moment is making many of us look at different elements of the human condition. And Desmond Tutu talked about Ubuntu. And I love the word. And he describes Ubuntu being an African word, which means my humanity is inextricably bound up in yours. And I think that's what good salespeople do. And that might seem rather strange. But it also mirrors another phrase that I've heard, which is the golden rule. And I don't know if many of you know what the golden rule is. I've been teaching my 13-year-old grandson the golden rule. And the golden rule is basically treat other people the way you would like to be treated. I was at a football match with my grandson and he started shouting at the opposition. And I said to him, remember the golden rule? And he said, it doesn't apply during a football match. And I said, yes, it does. The golden rule applies all the time. And that might surprise you because I believe that the golden rule is what salespeople do. There's a company in America called Nordstrom, and they're fantastic customer service. And one of their values is serve before you sell. It's much more about making sure that the customer is happy and gets what they want than it is about the company getting a sale. And I think that's what really stands out for me, is that idea that really good salespeople think about the customer in human terms and really tries to get close to them. One of the things I do at workshops is ask the question, can you give me an example where you've experienced really good customer service? And often there is no reply. Delegates cannot think of an occasion where they've had very good customer service. And then I ask the second question, which is, can you give me an example of where you've had very poor customer service? And the floodgates open. And it's quite shocking, some of the stories I've heard about customer service in Scotland. Now, that doesn't make me feel complacent. I just think, is my business being as customer focused and dealing with customer service as well as it could do? And I think that's one of the areas that any business, if they improve in their customer facing teams and the way they operate or customer service, can achieve so much more with their business. And that really does come down to changing the world one conversation at a time. There's a wonderful phrase which I love, which is every contact a customer has with your business is a moment of truth. The customer is deciding either yes or no every phone call, every email they get. And I'm sure you can all think of times where you've gone onto a website and very quickly given up and maybe used some bad language at the same time because of the frustration that's been shown by it. I want to talk a little bit about objective setting. And I think one of the things that comes out of the sessions that we do is that people say, well, I don't have the confidence to sell, or I fear rejection. And I think that, and we had that today at a workshop this morning, and I think the way I would handle that, if people are struggling in terms of worrying about rejection, worrying about what the customer is going to be like, think about it this way. If I asked you, marks out of 10 for your business, how many points out of 10 would your typical customer give you? Now, when I ask that question, most people say 8, 9. We can always improve, 8.5. And I think that that's a good starting point. If you are absolutely sure that what your company supplies, the value you offer your customer, then that's a good place to start in terms of feeling confident. I think the second thing that we need to help build confidence is knowledge. How knowledgeable are we about our company, about ourselves? How knowledgeable are we about our customer? I was telling them a story this morning. I had a wonderful sales guy that worked for me, Ken, and he talked about when he went to see a customer, and he'd always done a lot of research. I said to him, so how do you handle it? And he said, I use the daft laddie approach. And I said to him, well, what's the daft laddie approach? He said, quite often if I go and see a customer and I know what they're telling me, I already know it, I won't let on I know. Because if I do, there's a danger. The customer thinks I know more than I do. And I want to extract as much information out of the customer as possible. I think the third element, which I think is the challenge, is the skills, is the selling skills. I think I've come up with about 21 skills that I would concentrate on. But I think so if we look at emotional intelligence, we've got two sides to that. The confidence comes from understanding yourself, the salesperson understanding themselves. But I think it's about attitude. I think it's about having a view on the customer journey. Some people say to me, I hate cold calling. And I think that's because they look at it from the wrong way. They look at it from the point of view of, I'm going in here to get the business. And that's totally the wrong way to look at it. You're on a journey with that customer. Something like it takes 7 to 12 contacts with a customer to get the business with a new customer. Customer will not buy once they've met you once or twice. And the reason for that is, and it's probably fairly obvious if you think about it in terms of personal relationships. First of all, people have got to get to know you. Then you have to move them up the emotional ladder where they begin to like what you do or at least respect you. And finally, you have to get to trust. And it's when we get to trust, that's when people will start buying from you. And trust is a big issue at the moment in the world when you look at what's happening in politics. And so it's the same for companies. The customers are looking for 3 things before they'll buy from you. They want to be able to trust you. They want to be able to trust your product. Is it going to do what I require it to do? And thirdly, they have to trust your company. So these are the 3 things that has to be worked on before you can start getting orders. I was working with a small company. It was friends of mine ran a business called Midge Magic. And the son, Alistair, was going away up the west coast of Scotland to sell Midge Magic. It's the only natural midge repellent on the market. And this is last May. They were a little bit late in the season for Alistair to be going up the west coast of Scotland. And I did a couple of training sessions with him. And he was about to set off in his estate car with a car full of Midge Magic to sell. And I said to him, Alistair, you're away for 2 weeks. Don't come back until you've had 25 customers say no to you. And he said, but I want to get orders. And I said, you will get orders, but the 25 people that say no to you are going to supply you with a huge amount of information, because what you have to do is to say to them, oh, why is it not right for you? I'm very interested to know. And you will gather more and more information. And so we then set up a customer journey whereby he had done all the calls, he actually got 29 no's. So he actually came back feeling very, very pleased with himself. But it didn't end there. They then ran a series of exhibitions in October. They attended an exhibition in the SEC in January. Then Alistair went back up into February, and by that time they ended up going into profit. And you can see that it wasn't a one-off hit. It required several contacts to get the business. I was once speaking to a guy who sells car leasing to director level, and he was telling me he operates the 25 rule. He says, I need to call on something like 25 potential customers to get one sale. So sometimes it's 22, sometimes it's 27. He says, but I know when I get to 12, I'm getting closer to that sale. And he said, it's about attitude. It's about realizing you've got to keep going, and it's about persistence. And I think it's that idea that what we also realize is most of your competition will give up after 3 or 4 contacts, if that. I mean, I've seen the situation many years ago where I would run national exhibitions, and I know for a fact that we might pick up something like 250 sales leads. 50% of them would not be followed up. And that's quite common. I've been in touch with a national management membership organization, and I've emailed them twice, and twice they've not come back to me. And we've got to think about, is that happening in our business? Do we have a system in place to make sure that we're picking up on all the opportunities? Do we have a customer relationship management system? And it can be a very simple one, but we need a system whereby we build these contacts on a regular basis so that we move the customer up the emotional chain so we get them to the trust level. I love the story by Fred, the maitre d' for the Gavroche in London. He's become a bit more of a media celebrity now. He taught his young trainee waiters that as they showed people to their seat, they had to do what he called the golden touch. And the golden touch was basically to touch the back of the chair, or if they knew the person well and it was appropriate, just to touch their shoulder. And this is Ubuntu in action. This is basically, I am thinking about you and I want you to enjoy this experience. And I think in our businesses, we have to find ways of doing that. I mean, one of the things I say in my business is I don't want to manipulate people to buy from me. I want to inspire them. There's a great quote from Dan Pink who says, if you sell something to somebody, is their life going to be better afterwards? And if their life is better afterwards, with each customer, you're going to make the world a better place. And that's not some sort of weak way of looking at it. I would actually say that I'm the least naive person that I know. But having said that, the power of emotional intelligence is absolutely huge. I want to talk a little bit about trust, because I think it's just so important. And I don't know about everybody else, but I think what I'm going through at the moment is learning, spending quite a lot of time learning, but I'm also exploring emotional intelligence. What does it mean? What does it mean for me? What does it mean for my family? Alice and I were just talking before about worrying about people and how they're feeling. I've done a thing with my family, my children, and sent them a thing recently and said, let's watch out for each other. It's not a question of just being strong. It's a question of working out, is this person all right? And I just wonder if this way of working, which I think a lot of people are doing, is going to rub off us in a business sense later on, because we're not going to go back to life the way it was. I love the quote from Maya Angelou, if I can just read you this, which I think really hits home for me, not just in sales, but in personal relationships. I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And I think that's what great salespeople do, but I also think it's what we can do to make people's lives better. I've been watching a lot of different things, and one of the things I was watching recently was a chap called Benjamin Zander, who's a classical orchestra conductor, and some of you might have seen his TED.com talk. And I loved what he said. I bought his book, which is called The Art of Possibility. And two things that really hit home with me. One of them was, he said, and this is going back to the attitude we have. In one sense, he says, people live the life in spirals. The spiral goes down, they lose your job, we're on furlough, we don't get a promotion, things go wrong, as they do, so the spiral goes down. And then all of a sudden something happens and the spiral starts going up, they get a new job, they get a promotion. And he said, there's a different way we can live. And I think that's about what he calls living in the world of possibility. I think I live in that world of possibility. And I think the reason that I have always done that, and I think why it resonated with me, I might not look like it, but I was a very sickly child. Between the ages of about 7 and 8 and about 13, 14, I used to get bronchitis in the winter. And I think what I worked out for myself during those times when I wasn't able to do anything, I could just lie in bed before gradually getting better, is I worked out, where am I now? Okay, now I've just got to lie here. But then the next question is, where am I trying to get to? Well, I'm trying to get better and it's going to take 2 weeks. I don't have a choice. And the third one is, how am I going to get there? And the answer was, well, in 2 or 3 days, 4 days, I'll be able to start reading again. And I think that's a good way to look at life, this idea about possibilities. If we start, where are we now? Where we want to get to? And if you just look at what Alison and Sarah are doing at the Chamber, I would say you've embraced that idea about living in possibilities. I think the other thing I learned from Benjamin Zander was he talks a lot about shining eyes. And he talked about not realizing until he was 45, he'd been conducting for 20 years, that he didn't make a sound in the orchestra. He was the only one that never played anything. He was the one that waved the baton around and got his photograph on the front of the record cover. And he said that he realized that his job was to inspire the orchestra. And if the orchestra's eyes were not shining, how was he behaving? How was he making them that their eyes weren't shining? And I think that's a good way to look at how's my wife's eyes shining? If they're not shining, how am I behaving? If my grandson's eyes are not shining, how am I behaving? And that goes right into customers. How am I behaving that I'm not inspiring my customers? I'm not giving them shining eyes. And I think it's a fascinating thought to think about life that way. And I think you can do that. And it's very, very powerful when you do. And I would say it's often happened to me when I was working as a business facilitator. And I saw it as my job, speaking to a new start or somebody that was thinking of starting a business. My job was to get to the end of an hour and 15 minutes to make their eyes shine. Because if I could make their eyes shine, then I had helped them on their journey. I've got one practical I'm just looking at how we're doing for time. I've got one practical way of looking at this, and I found it really useful. It came from Stephen Covey, and it's about listening. We all talk about how important listening is, and this one really resonated with me. He described the way to listen is based on ear, E-A-R. And when he was very successful back in the 70s and 80s, when he'd written his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he said, I would arrive back in New York in the airport on a Friday and get into a yellow cab. And he said, I had about 40-minute taxi ride. He said, the taxi driver in New York, you can imagine, never has a nice time. And he says, I used to give him a gift. I used to give the taxi driver the gift of listening. And he said, what I would do, I would get into the cab and I would say to the taxi driver, so what sort of day have you had today? And the taxi driver, obviously never has a good day, would unload all the stuff that had happened that day to Stephen Covey. Stephen Covey would then reply and say, I can understand how that would make you feel. And he was very honest about it. He wasn't manipulating. He could feel for the guy. Getting back to Ubuntu again, it's a human reaction. And then he would go back and say, so what else has been happening in your life? And he would spend the 40 minutes going from inquire what's happened to you to acknowledge, saying, I can understand how you feel. That must have been very painful for you. And what he would never do in that 40-minute taxi ride would go to the third part of ear, which is response. And we all do it. And response is when somebody started to tell you a story, you start to think of a similar story or a better story or something that's happened to you. And as soon as you start getting into response mode, you are not listening. So he stayed and inquire what happened next, to acknowledge, I can feel for you. That must have been dreadful for you. And he said every time we got out the taxi driver was smiling, and quite often the taxi driver would get out as well, which they never did, and carry his little bag up the stairs to his apartment. And he said that was the gift of listening. And he said one of the things salespeople must do when they're dealing with customers in the first part of the conversation is listen. We don't get into solutions until much further into the conversation, because we've got to find out exactly what the customer's all about. So I love the phrase, and I think Stephen Covey is using that, which is listening with your entire being. And I think that's so powerful. I mean, young delegates at my workshop talk about body language. What should my body language be like? What should I be watching? And I said, do you think about your mum's body language when you're talking to your mum and having a really deep conversation? Of course you don't. It's natural. You're doing it anyway. And I think that's what it's about. It's being honest, and it's being really listening to somebody. I think the next thing I would say is one step past empathy is rapport. How do we build rapport? My own definition of rapport is having a good relationship with somebody who you disagree profoundly with. It's not about exactly what you're saying. It's about getting close to somebody. How do we do that? And I think it's back to the golden touch. It's back to every moment is a moment of truth. It's about being friendly in an honest way. It's about showing interest to somebody. And back to what Maya Angelou is people remember how you made them feel. That's really important. And we've seen that ourselves. I think the other thing that can happen is if we're in business to business sales, we read the culture of the company we're dealing with, and that's really important. So I think one of the last things I would say about selling is that salespeople become really good at working out how to communicate with somebody. I give you two examples. Some people are very obviously people. They like to please people. They're very gregarious. They're easy to talk to. And a customer like that requires a salesperson to deal in a certain way. But if a salesperson comes across somebody who's very, very task focused, just wants the answers, doesn't like time wasters, needs to get to the result quickly, then the way that a salesperson communicates with that kind of person is totally different. And so we could spend quite a lot of time talking about, well, how do we deal with different personalities? It's a natural thing we do anyway, but I would suggest that it's something worth pursuing. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about being a boss. When my son was about 2 years old, he's a lot bigger than that now, I came up with a theory called the theory of benign indifference. And I think it works when you're running sales teams. Theory of benign indifference is basically realizing that my son was going to hurt himself. And it was actually a good thing for him to hurt himself. So I should let him hurt himself, providing he wasn't going to hurt himself very badly. And so that was when I came up with this idea about the theory of benign indifference and letting them hurt themselves. And it was funny, about 20 years later, I heard a professor talking about the theory of benign indifference. I don't know if he stole it from me or whether he came up with it himself. Another way of looking about running your sales teams is the wonderful phrase or story that the Spanish grandmother told a guy at a wedding. And he said, there's only two things you can give your children: the roots to grow and the wings to fly. And I think sometimes in business, we don't give the new team members the roots to grow by giving them the knowledge, giving them the skills, and then we don't give them the way to fly, the wings to fly. And I think if we look upon how we train somebody, I think that's a good way of looking at it, is getting that balance between the roots and the wings. I love the talking about trust in a leader. And there was a chap who's the CEO, or the former CEO of Herman Miller, a company in America. And he said, 3 things you must do for your team. The first one is to define reality. Tell them how things are, and don't bullshit them. Tell them exactly how it is. He says the last thing you do with them is say thank you. And he says in between, you have to be the servant. And I think not enough leaders see themselves as the servant of the team. I worked for McCain Foods, the frozen food company, the Canadian company. We had a wonderful company. I went through much training with them. And the last training I got as a senior manager was, it's no longer enough to be an effective manager. You as a leader have to be inspiring. So that made us all think, what did that mean? But the last thing that Miller said was that being the servant to the team is huge, absolutely huge. And I used to have Alison McCain, who's now the CEO, the global CEO, would come to Scotland twice a year. And the first thing he always said to me was, where are we going today? How can I help you? And what do you want to know? And to have a boss like that, who was running a large company, it was just amazing to get to that level with him in terms of trust. And if I was to ask you, who were your best bosses? I bet they were very similar to Alison McCain. Okay. So that's I think just about finished now. The last thing I would say is something is a work in progress for me. I bought Liz Oliver's book, and Liz lives in Dundee, and she wrote a book called The Change Equation. And she talks about 4 intelligences. And we're aware of a couple of them. The first one is IQ, which we're all aware of, which is intellectual intelligence. She talks about physical intelligence, which is physical awareness, hand-to-ball coordination, being able to run, be a good sports person, be a good musician. We've talked quite a lot today about emotional intelligence, but the one we haven't talked about, which is becoming more people are more aware of, is spiritual intelligence. And by spiritual intelligence, we don't mean religion. It's sometimes called systemic intelligence, and it's the idea of seeing the big picture. It's about inclusion. It's about, I guess, the golden rule. And I think that's something that was already becoming more apparent before the lockdown, but I think is going to become even more, we'll become more aware of the idea of spiritual intelligence as we go forward. Okay. Is that all right, Sarah?
That's perfect, Sandy. Thanks very much. That was, yeah, really insightful, and I think it's gotten quite a few discussions going. I'm going to ask Graham Rue if he would unmute. Graham's got quite a good question sitting in the chat. So if you want to unmute yourself, Graham, you'll be able to obviously ask Sandy and get his advice.
Yes, evening, guys.
Hi there.
Hi, Sandy. The question I've asked is that we sometimes have a bit of a challenge when we get through all the effort of making a sale, which can often take several months in our case. We then win the work, which is great, but we find that's obviously just the start of the challenge.
Sure.
Is how to then get fellow employees as engaged in executing that sale to the customer satisfaction, because we obviously are much closer. We understand what the product's being used for, what their needs are, that people that have that as I've put there, a degree of separation are not always that close to it and don't always understand.
Yeah, it's funny because my son is going through that as well. He's almost like an ambassador for his company, and then has to go into the workshop and get the people involved. I would say it's about very early on in the process. I would suggest, perhaps if it's yourself, then I think you need to engage with the workshop. It doesn't really matter what sort of business it is, but engage with the people who are going to be responsible for moving forward with this. So if you bring them in on the conversation early, and one of the things that happened in McCain was that we would take customers down to be shown around the factory, and it was always a supervisor who was never briefed and never trained to do it. We just trusted the supervisors to show their passion for their job, and they felt totally bought into what we're trying to do, and we always got back to them and thanked them for their help when we got the business, or even if we didn't get the business. I think it's back to communication. But try and think about, put yourself in the shoes of the workshop. What are they thinking? And they don't think like a salesperson. But if you communicate with them, then I think you can achieve a great deal. I got very close to the secretaries in the office, but I was so reliant on them for my business that it's about communication. And do it early. They might not all buy into it, but I think it certainly helps. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks for that. I think it's we do take customers on factory tours, but perhaps, as you say, maybe we should be involving some more of the other departments in those visits and getting them a bit more exposed to the customers directly.
Can I just say, Graham, just a quick one that we used at McCain a lot. We would bring in different departments to a round robin meeting. Sometimes helps if you have a facilitator, and there's four simple questions to ask the group. And what you could do in our case, it would be sales and supply chain. So we would say to the supply chain, what are we doing well? What are we doing less well? What should we start doing? And what should we stop doing? So if you say that to the workshop, we would work with the supply chain. The supply chain were very open to the fact that they then understood what our business was, and we understood what they needed and how we were pissing them off. So that can be quite useful.
Okay, that's great. Thanks for that.
Thanks, Graham. Sandy, on the flip side of that, how do you make sure that the salesperson isn't selling something that is undeliverable or not joined up?
And that happened to me a lot. I think a team leader's job is to motivate and manage. And I think it's about the old thing about managing by walking about. And I think it's about setting standards and have your values. But I kind of think that if that's a concern, then, sorry, I've just had a different thought. There's different types of personalities and salespeople, and one of them is the lone wolf. And the lone wolf tend to be high performing and achieve a huge amount, but the worst ones to manage. And I think sometimes, I'm thinking about one in particular that I had. He was a bane of my life because he broke the rules continually. And I had to slap him down, but no matter how many times I slapped him down, he would still be the highest performer. So I think it's the job of the team leader to get a balance between slapping people down and encouraging them.
Thanks, Andy. Okay, we've got another question from Jan. Jan, if you want to unmute yourself, you'll be able to ask Sandy yourself.
Hi, Jan.
Hi, Sandy.
Hi,
Hope
Jan.
you can hear me.
Yes, I can.
At Selexis, we have a product which kind of tried to disrupt a bit the market. We're fairly small and fairly, I would say, new technology for our customers. And one of the reaction we tend to get is, we don't know you, we don't know your product, we have established product, and it's very difficult to convince people to test our product or try it. And I'm trying to find a way around this, how to convince them that they would be making the right move by testing.
I think the only answer to that is back to the 7 to 12 contacts, and the contacts can be, maybe you have to start thinking about it is, how can we as a company communicate with who we want to communicate? And that can involve exhibitions, it can involve certainly social media, it could involve perhaps PR. I think you have to look at, and even although you're a small company, that doesn't mean that it's going to cost you a fortune to do it. I think it's all about keep on persistence, and it's about communicate.
Mm-hmm.
The closer you can get to the customer might be the other element to this, which is if you've got a file on the priority customers, who they are, what you can find out about them, what their culture is, what motivates them, what's new about them, what their problems are. And I think if you keep doing that, it's not easy. I can remember on one occasion it took us 2 years to get a priority customer, but we just had to keep at it. And there's no shortcut to that. It's about persistence, gaining knowledge, having the process in place that you keep doing it, because what happens is your competitors will stop doing it. It's not good news, but you have to keep going.
Oh, I thought you would say that, but makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jan. Okay, we've got another question that Alison's asked. I'll just read it out. So Alison's asking, how do you handle the I'd love to buy from you, but it's just too pricey, can you do me a discount?
Well, I've got, to be a flippant for a minute, Alison, I've got the easy answer for that. If somebody asks me for a deal, I just say, well, my job is to teach you how to sell value. I wouldn't be doing much of a job for myself if I gave you a discount. I think that the answer there is it's about selling value. It's about selling and they're investing. So you are expensive. I worked with a company that had a great phrase. They talked about pride of price. They were told people they were the most expensive. I worked for McCain, and we were the most expensive French fries in the market. But you're more expensive than the competition for a reason. And if going back to, do you understand, and I'm not saying you personally, but if you understand your product and why it's the price it is, what gains is it satisfying for the customer? What pains are you taking away for the customer? So it's basically about maximizing the benefit to the customer and minimizing the cost to the customer. Now, you're right, the customer might say, yes, but I can buy this cheaper, but there's probably a reason for that. And then if the competitor has decided to price it in such a way that you can't see how they're doing that, then sometimes you have to walk away, because you certainly don't want to go down the route of going lower and lower in price.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, that's perfect. Some really, really good takeaway there for people. We don't seem to have any more questions. If anybody does have any questions, then pop them down in the chat. Any late questions that we get, we can obviously pass on to Sandy and kind of answer that afterwards. So I'm going to hand back over to Alison, who's just going to do a little bit of a wrap up.
I absolutely can't multitask because I was asking another question in the chat. I was just going to finish by saying, and I think you covered it a bit, Sandy, but how do we build trust in current coronavirus, and what the rest of the summer might look like? Do you think how's that going to be different?
I think that's a great question. I think it's like I was thinking that today about that. One of the questions used to be, in the old days, what did you do in the war, Daddy? And that was about, did you have a good war or not? And I think companies are going to be asked, what did they do during the lockdown? And I think it's about being human again. My wife is working from home at the moment, and she's having a very tough job about who should they push to get money from and who should they not. I don't think there's an answer other than where does trust come from? Trust comes from behaving in a human way. And I think it's keeping in touch with people. I mean, I'm keeping in touch with some potential customers that were going to be using my services, but I'm very careful about how I'm contacting them, but I'm still contacting them, trying to, back to what I said before, serve before you sell. You might not be able to get much in the way of business, but you're investing in the future by communicating with potential customers and customers. Offer them, if you're offering them solutions and insights, can be helpful. Just like I was saying about, well, how are we looking after? I got a thing from Rachel Weiss, which I loved. This so impressed me, I printed it off. How do you look after your team who are at home? And she said a lovely thing, you're not working from home, you are at home during a crisis trying to work. And that's what she was saying to her team. And I think things like that's helpful, because we've got team leaders all over who are saying, I'm not sure how I can support. So if you can support customers and potential customers at the moment without thinking about it from the point of view of what am I going to get out of it, I think that pays dividends later on.
Fab, I think you're right. Thank you so much. That's really, really insightful. Well, I think that's us nearly out of time. We have definitely run out of all the kind of questions that people had. But, we say this all the time, Sandy's not going anywhere. In fact, he's locked down, isn't he, for at least another 2.5 weeks. So we know how to put you in touch with them. So if you would like us to connect you with Sandy, please let us know. Let Sarah know. Sarah will put out a kind of a post-event email anyway, and this has obviously been recorded, so will be shared, and you'll be another YouTube star. No doubt there are YouTube videos of you out there, Sandy. Anyway, but however, we're delighted to add to that. So thank you so much for taking the time to come and just talk us through so many things, so many takeaways, It's just
Thank
as
you.
well it was being recorded, because I didn't have enough time to write down every single thing that I need to take away from it. So thank you for your time. Thanks so much to Sarah for organising us, and to everybody for dialing in and taking the time to stay out of the sunshine. It's been really, really pretty, but it's been cold, hasn't it? So I believe the temperatures are rising, so you'll get your evenings back for the rest of the week. But thanks very much again for joining us, and we'll catch up with you tomorrow if you're going to be on the call tomorrow. Thanks, folks.
Thanks
Cheers.
very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Sandy. Bye.
Bye. Bye.